So, good evening, Tom Greeves.
Hello, how are you doing, mate?
Very well, thank you. Very well. Thank you for joining me on one of my Zoomcasts or Zodcasts. I haven't quite settled on whether it's Zoomcast or Zod. Zoomcast is obviously a bit generic. Zodcast is a kind of pun on podcast, but also suggests Superman's
Yeah,
sworn enemy, if I remember. Kneel before Zod, is that right?
that's right. I'm just,
Yeah.
I'm just sort of frantically wondering if you're going to have the intellectual property lawyers on you. But
Yeah, I was worried about that as well. And also,
yeah.
phonetically, it sounds a little bit like Zogcast, Zog, Z-O-G, being
Oh gosh, yeah,
Zionist occupied government, being like the kind
yeah,
of really red hot kryptonite level of anti-Semitism. So
yeah,
there's
yeah,
quite a lot
yeah,
to play with there, one way or another.
yeah.
But anyway, it kind of
30
works for me,
seconds in, and we've
obviously.
already created a race war. That's quite something.
So, Tom,
One
you're
of
in
the reasons I have my
isolation.
beard is so I don't look like a. Sorry, one of the reasons I have my beard is so I don't look like a neo-Nazi.
Yeah. Oh, right. Because you have that look otherwise, do you?
Every time, literally, as soon as I went bald, that I went to a football match, clean shaven, I was always taken to one side and searched.
Really? That is
And then they heard
interesting. You
my
don't
voice
look
and all
that
was
way to
well.
me, and you don't give that energy off, I have to say. I think of you as a genial sort of, bear huggy sort of man, not a thug.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's nice.
I guess those were different days, different times. And the idea of a football match now in itself seems like an archaic sort of proposition
Yeah,
entirely, doesn't it?
it really does. Yeah.
The idea of
Um,
going anywhere where you could be searched or where you could cause bother.
yeah. It's going to be intriguing looking at well, I suppose they're quite predictable to an extent, but the dip in crime statistics of various crimes. Obviously, some will be going up, but
Did you watch the any of the Downing Street briefings? Do you watch those as they come out?
I saw not live, but I saw the Prime Minister's speech today.
But there was
And I
one a
have been,
couple of days ago because my wife works for she works in PR, and one of her clients likes to have their own transcript and not rely on the newspapers, which I think is
yeah,
a heinously poor waste of her time. But anyway, she has to sit
yeah.
down, watch it, and sometimes she's a bit tired. And so I do it, and so I do it for her. So I watched this one the other day, and it was Priti Patel, and she had on the head of the National Crime Agency, and that usual waste of space from National Health England, and I mean, it was just it was pathetic. They were we've caught a kilogram of cocaine. And nearly half a
Right.
million. And I was like, oh my God,
Yeah,
do you really think anyone gives a shite?
yeah.
In fact, if anything, to be honest, I would rather the cocaine was getting through at the moment. If these people need their cocaine to survive lockdown, this is not a good time to be forcing people into cold turkey, is it? Withdrawal habits from Class A drugs. I think you want everything just
No.
over.
Although I suppose it might be one of the more efficacious ways of going through cold turkey.
Yes, that's true. Maybe
I mean, literally be under house arrest. Wouldn't be much fun sharing with someone who's going through that.
They also said they managed to seize 24 illegal firearms nationwide. 24.
24.
I mean, it's bloody Toyland, isn't it? Extraordinary.
Yeah. Why are they doing press conferences on anything at all? I mean, who's going to be?
It felt like they were trying to move the focus away from nursing home deaths or, the usual things that they're up against the wall on and going, just in case any of you thought that because there's a national or international pandemic that we would take our eye off this ball or that ball, don't think they'd only attempt. And so they were listing, they had, that's my alarm to remind me to start this Zodcast. They were... they'd found a box of face masks with some cocaine hidden in it. These dastardly criminals attempting to piggyback in on the best wishes of providing the NHS with their necessary PPE. I don't know. I think it was pretty tin-eared. But then the only thing that's really helped the government in those press conferences, from my point of view, has been the equally dire performance of the journalists.
Yeah. there's been polling, hasn't there? And it really does seem that people are sick of it.
Yeah.
And there's, I mean, also there's hardly an original observation, but also the point that why are these the journalists that we want to be hearing from? Why not have the science editors?
Yes, somebody said get rid of the Downing Street, get rid of the NHS, get rid of them all, and install the actual scientists, and then get rid of journalists and get in science journalists, and then probably finally get rid of the cameras. And if you want to know about it, we'll read about it in the paper. I don't know if any of it does any good. It gives you the full sense, because the journalists ask these kind of the sort of questions that some bloke might ask, like me jabbing his finger at you in a pub if the pubs were still open. It gives you a full sense that your concerns are being voiced, even though they're not being answered. They're just being sort of muffled and bundled into a cupboard, aren't they?
Yeah.
I think psychologically that's all they're doing.
I mean, I suppose the counterpoint is, for all that you say, it makes sense, and yet I think they have to do a daily press conference.
Yes, I suppose
it's one of those things that's actually unavoidable.
Yeah,
you know, however sort of prosaic it gets, however pointless it seems. Just imagine if they weren't doing it.
Yes, if they were refusing to speak and nobody had seen anyone, and there were rumors of Donald of Kim Jong-un style. I can never, is it un or eel? Which one do we still have? I can never remember which one's.
Because it's technically it's a necrocracy, isn't it? North Korea.
A necrocracy. What mean they have to die?
Necrocracy. His even acknowledged by then that he dead grandfather is still the head of state.
Yes, and in fact, it was his failure to attend the dead grandfather's birthday party, I think, that was the first red flag about whether he's still alive. Yeah.
Right.
Failed to show up, not at a commemorative like ceremony or anything, but literally a birthday party, even though he's been dead for 50 years or something. Yeah. A necrocracy, though. I didn't know that's what that was called. Okay.
I think I probably mispronounced it, but it'll be necro.
Yeah.
Crassy.
There was the necromancer. What do you think?
Well, that's a different bag of.
Yeah, she looks pretty. I think she looks pretty chill and evil. I mean, I think that could be a real step up in the acceleration that we're looking at in 2020.
Yeah, I wonder to what extent people accurately look good or evil. You said I had a nice countenance earlier, because I hope this isn't a grotesquely rude thing to say, but there's definitely the touch of evil genius about you.
How do you think?
Visually, and I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah, just because of the eyes, It's probably just the eyes, isn't it?
Sort of.
Although my friend the other day, because I set this a bit of side light up for doing these things, because otherwise you're overhead light. But with the side light, he said it's really remarkable how deep the furrow is here, the sort of Klingon vertical groove, And I suppose that is used in Star Trek to indicate evil, isn't it, with the Klingons?
Yeah.
It's not as immediately visible under normal lighting conditions, but I can really enhance it like that. You see that?
That's good. Yeah.
The deep furrow.
There's your next DVD cover.
Yeah, that's actually just the furrow of parenthood. That's all that is.
No. How's all that going? You doing much of the homeschooling?
Well, they have e-schooling from the teachers, and they have that on their iPads or whatever. And I would love to pretend that it's hell, but actually I managed to avoid quite a lot of it. Kate gets up earlier than I do in the morning, make sure they've had their sugar puffs, and then they're set down on their desk by 9 o'clock. In fact, by 8 o'clock, I think. And
really?
It's not, but that was always the thing. They go to school early here anyway. And, I mean, it's patchy, and I'll come up in the middle of the day and everybody's on the Xbox, but he assures me he's going back into class at some point, And as far as I can tell, I mean, it's all pretty pointless now anyway. Matilda was supposed to be doing GCSEs this summer. Then they've gone, we're not going to be able to give exams. So what instead we're going to do is it'll be sort of assessed on your coursework and your record so far, but there will be sort of assessments as well based on how well you've done your revision. And then they've had this kind of retreat from that, and they've gone, oh, we won't really use the assessments even, and now it's basically spin the wheel, So that's quite sort of demotivating from her point of view. And Edward, he hasn't got anything to sort of worry about at all in that respect. So it's all kind of, I mean, it really is just killing time, which, they seem to be fine with. But there is a part of Kate and me, I think, thinking, Jesus, this is costing us a fucking fortune. And it's all just utterly pointless, If it was state school, I don't think I would mind at all. I don't think they would care either. But you are sort of going, and this is costing us how much a day?
Yeah. I thought you were going to say it's pointless because these are the end times.
Well, there is that as well.
It's not quite that bleak.
Whatever society they emerge into, I suppose it will still be advantageous to have some kind of basic education. But I don't know whether it will be quite as advantageous to have the usual things. You might be right. Might be much more about foraging and recognizing certain mushrooms and that sort of thing.
You might just want them to build up them. You'd probably just put them on a steroid regime and have them lifting weights and teach them some unarmed
Edward is doing that. Edward has just started. He is now at the age where you walk into his bedroom and you're hit by a solid wall of teenage funk. That kind of the chemical changes are undergoing. So he's got the pull-up bars over the door frame, and he's got a kettlebell, and he's got a couple of little dumbbells in there. And he's actually trying to sort of put a little bit of muscle on his skinny frame. So probably as good as anything, really. I
had at his sort of age, I had quite a change. I wasn't overweight until my late teens, but I was a reasonably ponderous primary school kid. And I remember the summer of my first year at secondary school, and we were told to line up with people would be about the same speed as for a 100-meter race. So I found two sort of dumpy kids. And then I won by about 30 meters. And what had happened was I'd started going through puberty massively earlier than everyone else.
Right.
And of course, it then flattered to deceive, because I went from being not very good at sport to being very, very good at athletics and rugby and stuff, just because I was a grown man at 12. Well, I was probably the size of a 17-year-old boy at 12.
Yeah.
And then by my middle teens, I was the size of a hefty man. And so, of course,
What size would you say you were now, Tom?
I'm literally twice that size now.
Right.
I'm a very good rugby union front row now.
Entire front row.
Both props and the hooker. Yeah. But no, that was quite a glorious few years.
Yeah.
It's different for girls, of course.
Testosterone is a strange thing, isn't it? People underestimate the impact it has. But I noticed there were a couple of kids in Edward's year, 3 or 4 years ago, who went early. And even just the way they played football, not just their strength, but their composure, it was just like a man with some boys, just a different kind of, it doesn't just give you strength and aggression, it gives you a sort of sense of purpose and orientation, I think, as well.
Definitely. But the strength thing is a factor. I hospitalized someone horribly playing football. It was a complete accident. I didn't even mean to make sort of legitimate contact with him. We just collided. And he collapsed, and he's fine, by the way, so I'll cut to the chase, he's fine. But I'd shunted his skeleton 2 centimeters down his body.
Wow.
Really, contact sport, because boys go through puberty at such different rates.
What happened then?
Really
was it pulled back up again, or does he remain with it at that lower level?
Stumpy, yeah, he's, I think it sort of sorted itself out.
Yeah, gradually worked its way back up again. God.
They went through a phase in New Zealand of having boys play rugby by body weight, not age.
Yeah,
which makes a lot
more sense. Yeah.
When I was 15, we went to another school, and the games teacher came up to shake my hand because he thought I was his opposite number. So but it's tougher for girls.
It's funny how you go through those few years, and you probably were aware you were enjoying it, but you probably weren't quite aware how special and unique that period in your life was going to be.
Yeah, I wish I'd gone around kicking people's ass.
Yeah.
and having loads of girlfriends. I should have done
girlfriends is the obvious thing. Grab loads of girlfriends, because even once the others catch up, you have by then established that you are a player, and that will give you that kind of extra cred going forward, a reputation.
Yeah, but I think success in that field as a teenager has a huge impact on one's outlook on all of it later in life.
Yeah, definitely.
Even if things change profoundly, it's because people are overcompensating. Yeah. But I was going to say, I think early puberty is much harder for girls. Much harder for girls. Brings all sorts of pressures they don't want.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, I wouldn't even want to talk about any that I know. It was a little intrusive.
No, of course, no.
But yes, I do know what you mean. Unwelcome attention and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Yes, but then they have, their dads to lurk in the background and stare sternly at anyone who's giving it to them.
Quite right.
Ideally, really, I mean, Matilda, who turned 16 2 weeks ago, so obviously, she's gone through that period now. But yeah, I mean, this would have been ideal for any girls, really, a few months of lockdown from which they can emerge, as a fully formed princess.
Yeah.
There might be some who are enjoying it from that point of view. And whose father...
Well, I'm working on something, not going to turn into a princess, but I'm doing something similar myself. I am using time to do a lot more working out.
Right.
So I hope people will be seeing a lot less of me in the...
So what's your regime at the moment then?
So I hired a personal trainer in January. Obviously, he can't come anymore, but thankfully I kind of kitted out our barn. So I've got kettlebells and a bench and stuff. But the real game changer has been getting a punch bag, because it's the first time I've ever... Since I was a kid and played lots of football and rugby and stuff, it's the first time I've ever enjoyed aerobic exercise. And that's a real game. Yeah. That is
aerobic, is it? Punching things?
Yeah, because I go quite a bit. Yeah. In fact, and this is very new, my desire to exercise is now ahead of my physical ability, which is a new development.
Yeah.
You put on some music. I mean, it sounds like it's monotonous, but it isn't. Whereas sitting on a rowing machine is basically the same experience. You can throw a whole different range of combinations and different punches, and you can do different routines.
But what do you, when you do resistance work, like deadlifts and squats or whatever?
Yeah.
You're working against gravity, right? You're trying to move weight upwards, and it wants to go downwards. When you do rowing, you're working against a resistance, which is usually either a coiled spring or paddles going through water or whatever. Again, you're working something against its inclination to stay still. When you're just punching a bag, I mean, moving your arm, that's just your arm. There's not much weight there, and you're only moving.
Not if you throw a punch properly.
Right. Where does it? What muscles are you using? I mean, obviously, boxers are hugely powerful. I understand that, but at that point at which you make contact, is that the point at which exercise takes place, as it were?
Well, the thing is, you're using your whole body, so obviously everything's powered through your hands, but a decent punch is really thrown from the legs and the hips.
Right.
Shot put's very similar in that regard.
Right.
There was a guy called Ulf Timmerman who was an East German shot put world record holder, and he had quite a small upper body. It was quite weird. You sort of thought he doesn't look like a shot putter.
Yeah.
Then you look below the waist, and he had great big thick legs. You think of it as an upper body exercise, but actually everything's been generated from the posterior chain. So
right.
Yeah. I went to a boxing gym years ago with some friends, and the guy who ran it showed me how to throw a hook. And I realized I was doing completely wrong, because most people will snap from their shoulder and you won't generate much power doing that.
No, right.
But if it comes from the hips, then you're using the whole body.
And work towards the back of the room a little bit and give us some demos then. Come on.
All right. So you're really it's coming like this, right from the hips. So you're not just snapping from the shoulder.
No.
It's really bam like that.
So are you swiveling? Are you swiveling at the hip level?
I am swiveling, yeah. So my feet are planted sort of, I can't quite back up enough, but it's coming from the hips, and it's just,
Interesting.
And it's a fantastic feeling.
And that's what you do to this bag, is it? You
I beat the crap out of the bag, yeah.
You give it whatever, what are those called?
Jab, I do. Yeah, I do some jabbing. Yeah.
Yeah.
The other
uppercut, I suppose, can you, with a bag?
It's harder to know. You have to get a specialist bag for uppercuts.
Do you have that one overhead as well? The little brrr.
Not yet. No, I might get one of those.
That's the one I liked in the movies. I always thought that was more fun. That kind of brrr, brrr.
Yeah.
You can do it quite lazily.
Exactly. Yeah. Like a Rocky montage or something.
Yeah, that's right.
The other thing I found, which is quite interesting.
Go on, sorry.
No, I don't jog up to the top of anything.
Barford St Michael Capitol Building, whatever it is.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I can just about do a flight of stairs now, which is a great achievement. I can generate far more power with my hand like that than like that.
Right.
Maybe some of your, so like this.
Yeah.
Much harder than like that.
Yeah.
Your correspondents who are biologists might be able to tell us why.
One thing I have noticed on Edward's overhead pull-up bars, you've got the horizontal, and then a couple that come out like that. Well, I call that the hammer grip.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's correct, but that's pretty much the easiest grip to pull yourself up on. The hammer grip is definitely.
Yeah.
I can do like about 5 like that, maybe 1 or 2 with the wide grip, and about 3 or 2. You know, that's all right, but that's really the that's good. I want a heavy bag. How much do they cost then?
Not much. I mean, if you were getting a kind of recognized brand one, then there'd be a lot more, but it was less than 100 quid.
And you have to have you have to know how to attach it to the ceiling, I assume, do you?
So I got, rather than a hook, I got a sleeve that looks a bit like what you put around your upper arm when you have a blood pressure test.
Oh, right, yeah.
So that goes around with Velcro, and then a thing like a seatbelt goes around it again, and then it hooks onto the bag. So I've not had to make any holes in the beam, which is great.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And it's in place.
But the beam is in your case, is it?
Sorry?
This is like a visible beam in your house, is it? Or was it in your garage?
We've got it's a barn. The house used to be a farmhouse.
Yeah. So if it was just in a bedroom, then you would struggle then, right?
I think you'd really struggle in a bedroom. You can get freestanding ones that come from the floor, right. But at the risk of sounding impossibly macho, a friend of mine who boxes told me I'm too strong for those.
Yeah, well, I would imagine that. Yeah, no, I think that's plausible. Even if it would just be, What about those ones that look like a mannequin on a spring that have sort of bottom weighted? Do you know those ones?
Yeah. And they can actually be shaped like a man, can't they? So
but you probably have to have a lot of weight in the bottom of that, wouldn't you? I expect. But
I think they will fill them with sand or water. Yeah.
Or my third alternative, we have got a large beech tree in the back garden.
Right.
Branches are too high, I think, to hang a heavy bag off, but I could just wrap a mattress around it, I suppose.
Sure.
Does that really work? And just punching it probably doesn't, does it? It's not ideal.
What you've got to do, and it's very tempting not to, but you must, is wrap your hands.
Right, okay. Do you not wear boxing gloves as such?
Both.
Yeah, right.
You wrap them and then put gloves on. I've got medium-sized hands, which are quite small for someone my size, and actually there's so much, I'm generating more power than my hands and wrists can cope with currently. You have to acclimatise.
So what does wrapping them do then?
You sort of wrap tightly around them, and it just protects them, and it gives them wrist support.
Yeah, okay. Oh, would be good for Edward as well, would it? Presumably.
Brilliant.
That might speed him up through puberty as well. Once it's started, want to get it done.
Yeah.
And what do you spend the rest of the time then? What are you doing with the rest of your time?
Well, I am working during the day. I'm preferring TV to reading, I must say, quite considerably so. There's a village book club which has started virtually, and I do take part, but I'm having to slightly sort of stretch how recently I've read some of the things I've
got to be honest, I love reading so much in principle, and yet every time I actually sit down to do it, if I leave it till nighttime, I start to fall asleep, and otherwise my mind just wanders. And yet, if you ask me, I would say, books are the most marvelous thing. Reading is like the greatest gift you can give your child, is a love of and all that kind of stuff. Every time I sit down with a book, I'm like Tony Hancock.
People always assume I love reading. Teachers at school did, and it's not that I've kind of gone so far as to feel rebellious about that, but the truth is I really read when there's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
Not literally anything else, but it isn't ever my first choice. Probably.
That was all the great readers of the past, the great intellectuals of the past, when reading was the thing. That was the case, wasn't it? There wasn't anything else to do. Certainly not in the East.
No, exactly. Exactly.
They would have had.
I've never. Sorry, I think I keep talking over you. I don't mean to. There's no delay though, I don't think, is there?
No, I think it's fine. Well, it's a tiny bit, but no more than normal. I can't hear any echoes or anything. Yeah.
Okay.
So what have you been watching then?
What I've really been enjoying, it's been a huge consolation. really cheering me up and kind of transporting me, which I do need a little bit, is Brooklyn Nine-Nine, the sitcom. Which
very good.
Have you seen it?
Oh yeah, my kids again love it. Sorry, I don't want to make this all about the kids, but do you know
So
Shappy
good.
Corsandi?
Yeah, I gigged with her once. Yeah.
Shappy put a list of she recast Brooklyn Nine-Nine with English comedians recently.
Oh, okay.
And I was fortunate enough to be cast as, I can't remember his name, the quite elderly black police chief.
Raymond Holt, Captain
Raymond Holt, exactly. So elderly
very
black
high
homosexual police chief, and that was very
Yeah.
flattering. To be fair, I wasn't the only one who was cast against race and God knows what else, but I was quite pleased with that actually, because he's got quite a bit of presence, isn't he?
He is my favourite character, and
I mean, to be fair, in fact, you would be probably a shoo-in if she had cast her net a little wider. I think you'd make a more plausible Captain Holt than me, but
yeah, yes, yeah. I mean, there's a couple of characters I much more closely resemble physically, but I suppose
which one?
That's not what it's all about.
No, it's the aura, isn't it?
Yeah.
Anyway, we're both
that's right.
Holts, I think we're both Holts, and I can't remember who else was in it. Who you might know.
Quite a few of the actors are actually stand-ups in real life.
He made Adam Bloom. I can't remember his name. The one who's a bit like, kind of like nervous, anxious, Jewish.
Oh, I don't know if he's Jewish.
You might say the main star, or he might be Italian, is he? But they put him in as Adam Bloom. The one who's a bit like, I'm trying to remember, who's the guy in Police Academy? What was his name? Steve? Guttenberg, yeah. So he's a bit like Steve Guttenberg, right? That guy.
Oh yeah, no. So Peralta, the character Peralta is both Italian and yeah. Okay.
So they made that Adam Bloom, but I was thinking really that should have been Josh Widdicombe.
Yeah, that's a better fit.
Yeah,
Josh Widdicombe more closely inhabits that kind of character. Yeah.
But I don't know too many of the others by name, so it'll get long and painful if we try and go through it. My son's favourite sitcom at the moment is Friday Night Dinner, which does my head in. Have you ever watched that?
Yes, weirdly, and this is quite weird, I'm related to the guy who plays Jim.
Which one's that?
Mark Heap.
Oh yeah, okay. You're related to Mark Heap. Well, he's very famous. Yeah, Jim the Mad Neighbor.
Yes, I had a big decision. Yeah. I had a big decision once because I was on the tube and I realised it was him, and there was one seat left, and he sort of gestured wordlessly, "Would you like to sit down?"
Yeah,
and I said no, please, and realised that it probably wouldn't be very fair to him for a very large man in a confined space to say, "And by the way, we're related."
How do you know? And he doesn't know then.
No, we've never met. His father and my grandfather were first cousins.
Nice.
My sister has met him in a sort of situation where it was easier to talk at more length and therefore both tell him and not terrify him. But I thought I better not say it. I better not tell him. Yeah, but
he's a very funny actor. Very funny. All the people in it are funny and clever actors, but the brief has been to play it quite broad, hasn't it? I find it a little bit too. I don't know. Is it old-fashioned or something? Is that quite? I don't know. It's not exactly old-fashioned, but there's a certain kind of pantomimic. Anyway, the kids love it. Kate finds.
You're just going to insult close family members of mine, Simon.
Well, Mark Heap was also in. I mean, he was in things like Jam, wasn't he, with Chris Morris?
Yeah, and he was in Spaced and
Spaced, massive in Spaced. That's right. He's done lots of very credible stuff, so he doesn't need that.
He really has. Yeah, he's terrific.
And it's funny. We were asking.
If you're watching, Mark, it'd be lovely to catch up.
I did some podcast with this guy for a kind of, I suppose, quite right wing. Not a think tank exactly, but adjacent to the Spectator magazine and so on. And it's called "So What You're Saying Is." I'm trying to remember the guy's name. I was so bad with name. Peter Whittle, that's his name. He used to write for Sunday Times Culture magazine and so on. Very bright guy, really lovely guy.
He's a UKIP guy, isn't he?
Yeah, exactly. He was a UKIP candidate. He didn't come across as particularly what people might think as UKIP-y, but they're definitely a sort of right wing stroke libertarian. But one thing he wanted to talk about was, has the BBC gone beyond the pale? Is it too left wing? And it's, you know, what happened to Morecambe and Wise and Wise comedy? And there is a part of me agrees with that, but there was another part of me which was inclined on the day to defend, if not the BBC, then modern comedy at least. I do think people have a ridiculous tendency to look back through rose-tinted spectacles at the old sitcoms. You know, they worked a charm at the time, of course. Yeah, Elaine Half Hot Mum and Last of the Summer,
Sure.
you know, kept my father entertained. But just the speed of the sort of Modern Family or Brooklyn Nine-Nine or The Simpsons, obviously, or South Park, you know, the intelligence, the depth, the verbal panache, you know, that's demonstrated. It's incredible. They're still going through a golden age, I think. And yet a lot of people just seem to feel disappointed and weary that everything is so fractured. I don't know why it's important to people that everyone watch the same programs.
Well, it does seem quite anachronistic as a concern, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose, obviously now families do live together. It's an interesting question, this. I think my tastes in most things are pretty mainstream. And comedy is one thing where they're really not. If I'm not surprised by something, it just doesn't make me laugh.
Yeah.
Viscerally. I don't mean there's a sort of intellectual position it has to be like that. The kind of the comedy of oh yeah, that's so true, or the whole kind of familiar thing, that's never done anything for me. I don't like it at all.
Right. It's funny because it's true. That doesn't work for you.
I completely see the merit in it, and it really isn't it's not a sort of, as it were, intellectual position. It's just a visceral thing. I just don't find that funny.
I've always thought that you get different kinds of laughs in comedy clubs. Obviously, you've got
true. Yeah,
a couple of 200, 300 people sitting together, and if the night is going well, then generally speaking, they decide as an audience whether or not something is funny. You know.
Right.
But you do definitely get the best laughs. The most satisfying laughs are the ones where they do feel as if they've literally been punched, where they aren't going, ha, 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 you know.
Yeah.
When they've got, you know, that's what you want to hear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is, I don't know whether you'd call it surprise. Sometimes it's like, he's not going to say that. Surely he's not going to say, oh my God, he said it. You know, sometimes it's they're delighted that you went where they didn't think you would, but hoped you might. And other times there is just complete shock. I mean, I love that comedy of delight, and I love when something is just done so perfectly. There was a thing on Twitter recently, there was people were asking, what is your favorite episode of your favorite sitcom? One of my favorite episodes of The Simpsons is the one where they have Sideshow Bob, who is, of course, always voiced by Kelsey Grammer, who was, of course, Frasier. And in this one episode, I think it was the third one they did with Sideshow Bob. He's released from jail and still wants to kill Bart. And his brother appears in it, Sideshow Bob's brother. I can't remember what they called him. And he was played by Niles from Frasier. He was played by David Hyde Pierce.
So was it? That's lovely. Yeah.
And so they had scenes in which Frasier and Niles are like in scenes together, just them, chatting away in exactly the same way that they do in that show, with sort of snobbery and barely constrained contempt for one another's, you know, gauche behavior, whatever. And it was written, and I think at times it was like the best Niles Frasier dialogue that has ever been written, and it wasn't even there. You know, it was like they went, if we're going to write Niles and Frasier together in a sitcom, it has to be so good that people go, this is actually better. And it was back within those characters. There's one moment where Sideshow Bob is intending to, I can't remember if he's going to destroy or just open a dam, but anyway, a hydroelectric dam he has in his sights, and he's going to use this to drown Springfield and kill Bart. And they're having dinner in this sort of shack, Niles and Sideshow Bob. And Niles says, why have you, I didn't know you had an interest in hydroelectrics. And he said, I wouldn't call it an interest so much as a vocation. And And Niall says, "Oh, come now, nobody has ever had a vocation for hydroelectrics." And so Bob raises his eyebrow in expectation again. "Oh, very well, the Cappadocians. I grant you that."
Really?
It's just this absurd sort of intellectual. It was, well, it's so self-indulgent, but it's amazingly sort of on point as well as an homage. Anyway, you just wouldn't get that in any other sort of. I can't imagine, that level of intelligence really sort of coming out of any classic British sitcom, I'm afraid. However,
Asterix had that, didn't it?
Sorry?
The Asterix series had that.
Yes, yeah.
Loads of really clever in-jokes and people who were obviously based on someone else, often a contemporary person.
I remember friends of mine were massively into the Asterix things. I didn't really get it, although I liked the pictures, but I couldn't really follow the jokes and understand them. But one thing I've always been curious about was the degree to which new jokes had to be invented for the English translations, or whether they really were translating the jokes themselves. Because I don't think a lot of it would have worked if it were over here.
No, it must have been a bit of both.
With French satire.
Yeah.
Well,
Laurel and Hardy appear. There are two characters.
Go say again.
Sorry. There are two. In one of, I can't remember which one, but in one of them, there are two characters who are obviously, very obviously, Laurel and Hardy.
Oh, right. In Asterix.
So I think, So I think they.
Do you know the famous story about Magic Roundabout, about the origins of that?
Yeah, I don't know whether it's apocryphal or not, but there is, yeah.
Well, it was definitely, I don't know how apocryphal, apparently it was Emma Thompson's dad. That much is true, I believe.
That is true, yeah, that is true, yeah.
But, it wasn't a children's show. I don't know quite but it was a satirical show, and all those characters were satirical figures. I think Zebedee was probably based on de Gaulle, wasn't it?
But why would he have that big moustache?
Didn't de Gaulle have a moustache, or am I thinking of somebody else had a moustache? De Gaulle had the big nose, didn't he?
De Gaulle, I can picture de Gaulle because he looked hilariously like my other grandfather. Right. Or, obviously that's quite a self-absorbed thing to say, but others would say my grandfather looked like de Gaulle, but that's not the way I see it. That's more familial pride.
I think they were like kind of archetypes, perhaps rather than specific figures. So I suppose Ermintrude probably represented, the Farmers Union or something.
Yeah. Because they do this with Disney films now, don't they? Because I guess partly as well, because Disney know that kids are going to watch it several times over. They put things in for the parents, sort of in jokes the kids couldn't possibly get.
Yeah.
More sophisticated jokes, which is good. The other thing about sitcoms I was thinking is probably they lend themselves much more than almost any other comedic form other than improv to multiple writers.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. They've learned how to do that. That's one of the big differences in the American industry, isn't it? Is that they have teams of sort of 20 or 30 writers. We have, I've sat in writing rooms with a team of 4 or 5 writers in the UK, but they've always been for panel games. They're basically trying to come up with a sequence of gags, and those will be for Jimmy Carr or whatever to use at the end of the show. And it's quite interesting the way the dynamic works in the writer's room. The 4 or 5 hours is spent essentially just burning off all the smut and outrageous libel and the completely unusable stuff, until you then get down finally to what you might actually be a legally viable script, and then that's passed on to. But one thing I did notice was Frankie Boyle used to be in the writers' room for 8 out of 10 Cats. I didn't do many days there, but he was a regular there. And that he was one of those who would come up with those horrific jokes that made the writers' room laugh, but you knew wouldn't get on. And then, essentially, when he got on Mock the Week and revolutionised that, essentially what he was doing the stuff that made the writing room laugh, but previously nobody had had the balls to do on telly, and somehow he did get away with it. I think possibly because of that very sort of deadpan, eyebrows raised, looking through quite thick glasses. Who can? How offensive can it possibly be? But
there might be some sort of weird way in which the middle-class chatterati cut more slack to a Scotsman than they would say to you or I if we were saying.
Well,
things
my
like
dad
that.
always said that about Connolly. He said, you know, because normally, and I agree with him to some extent, if you're really turning the air blue, it's fine in a comedy club or in the Glasgow Empire. But when it comes beamed into your sitting room, just as you're all cutting up the sandwiches, you know, it's a bit far away. But
yeah.
Connolly could get away with it. Connolly could get away with it even on Parkinson, you know, even though, of course, you know, I mean, he shocked the nation just with the wife's arse sticking out of the grave, didn't he? You know?
Yeah.
That seems incredibly tame now when you compare that to Frankie Boyle saying that the Queen's pussy is haunted. You know, just this is how far we've come in 30 years. But
I'll tell you one of my favourite Connolly routines, though, was he went to New York and did a set that Whoopi Goldberg introduced. And it's brilliant. But one of the things I like about it, actually, is how conservatively he was dressed and how conservative, not big C conservative.
Yeah.
So he'd been in a movie, so he'd had to cut his beard off and his hair was quite short.
Yeah.
And it was just, not that there was any doubt that he was funny without the kind of fripperies, but
I'll be honest with you. I agree with you. I found, you know, some of the way he dressed. I mean, I remember the most famous, probably like the peak of his fame in the UK, arguably anyway. I guess it was mid-80s, The Audience with Billy Connolly, and he had that strange sort of flappy shirt.
Yeah.
You know, I found that off-putting.
Right.
It wasn't a big problem, but it wasn't an enhancement. I would have found him much funnier if he'd just been in a jeans and a lumberjack shirt or something. He could look a bit outdoorsy, but or whatever, fine. Yeah. And when he started dyeing his beard purple or lilac or whatever colour that was, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My favourite David Bowie performance is of him wearing a very normal suit with an acoustic guitar singing Starman.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a bit of a thing of mine. I have a...
But Bowie knew how to... He could dress as a sort of android alien, but he could also... Or androgynous, rather, alien. But he could also... He could be immaculately tailored, wasn't he? I mean, that was the thing. He sort of invented new wave... New romantic Spandau Ballet kind of gear as well, with the David Live sort of outfits and stuff. So he had great taste across the boundaries. Really, not many people can pull that stuff off. And stand-up comics very often are dressed awfully. I mean, really not dreadful, but I suppose what I'm rowing back on that a bit. But I can't think of any that dress well. You know, normally they come on and you go, huh. He's not made much of an effort, and then you just sort of forget about it. You know, that's the best you can hope for, isn't it? You know, which is a shame. American comics often look a lot smarter, a lot sharper.
And working class comics of the past would dress more smartly, wouldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember Mark Lamar saying that, who did dress very smart, always had a kind of mohair suit. And he said, absolutely, it was a part of working class pride that you had a night out and you would dress up for it, sort of thing. I mean, I always did for years. I wore a very smart mohair silk blend cut suit, and that was great. But it's funny, after 20 years of it or so on, I suddenly had a moment where I go, oh, I want to try something else now. It's almost like you want to put on a different costume, you know, try a different character for your clown. Or maybe maybe you become, as a comedian, the kind of comedian that wouldn't wear a suit anymore. But Jack Dee has kept it going. Jack Dee always looks good, you know. And
I never felt
rumpled as well.
Yeah. I never felt comfy in a suit. I mean, I did gig with suits because I'd gig after work, but I never really felt my character should be wearing a suit. There's also the practical
your character should wear. What do you think you would be? Boxing shorts, maybe?
No one needs to see that. No one deserves to see that. Only if it's a well-paid gig. I think that, you can take it. I mean, this is a really interesting point because as soon as it looks effective, that's a huge problem, isn't it? But I'd rather wear jeans and a kind of nice shirt, but sort of untucked and.
See, if you were going to play a character, one great character that you could go straight in on, and I should probably wind this up now, Tom. So I'm going to leave you with this thought. You don't need to give me an immediate reaction on this. But have you considered the Demis Roussos?
I have a stranger came up to me in the street once and said that to me.
I mean,
I was carrying a guitar at the time.
It's not just you have the heft, obviously, but you have the same sort of aura as well. There is because a very gentle man, wasn't he? Had a very loving spirit, and there's the potential to what would you call it? Parody that the sort of lurking sex beast that's never very far beneath the surface. A highly fancied man in the 70s, wasn't he, Roussos? Absolutely surrounded, dripping with the stuff, you know.
So I gather, yeah.
Yeah, and I think you could play that to perfection. So you just wear a big white, it's kaftan they call them, aren't they? The big sort of flowing thing, you know. Maybe a few garlands.
There was a period I got very fed up wearing a suit and tie, and remember, do you remember Bernie Grant, the Tottenham MP?
Yes.
Who would wear robes even on the most formal occasions?
Did he? I don't
remember
that.
Robes
I remember, yeah, Haringey, wasn't he? He was one of that whole. They were like the early version of what was it called? Momentum, but in the 80s. What, Militant?
Militant, yeah, Militant, yeah.
It was one of Labour's trouble spots.
Yeah.
Well, next time I see you, Tom,
I'll have something made up.
I want to see the duvet cover repurposed.
Yeah.
Gathered around the waist, obviously, a little bit of gold rope.
It'll be about the right size. I won't need to have it tailored, really. I'll just stick it on. Great.
Next one we do, I want it to be done in the... do you have Wi-Fi in the barn?
Oh, no. Well, I can look into that, but not currently.
See if you can get...
So we can have a little montage.
Exactly. I would like to get a bit of a montage on the Zoom. A great...
Yeah.
Tom.
And when lockdown ends, we'll do a charity boxing match, yeah?
Okay, fine. I'll putting the work in now. I'm going to end the recording now, and then I'll say goodnight to you a second time afterwards, so stick around. But thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, Tom Greeves.